What is the mantle?
So I can show you what the mantle is.
Ooh.
So we've got two beautiful, what we call mantle xenoliths.
Ooh.
And this gorgeous green component that you can see in the middle, this little square tablet, that is the mantle. And so it represents a rock that forms the vast majority of our planet. More than 60% of our planet is made of this gorgeous green rock, which is dominated by this green mineral called olivine. And really, in the simplest terms, it is the main ingredient of our planet. So when we think about all the processes that are occurring, when we think about volcanism, when we think about the creation of plates and all those amazing environments, really, this is our starting place.
Yeah.
You need this main ingredient, and then you can make all those wonderful processes occur.
Hi, and welcome to Wonder, the Planet Earth podcast for curious people. I'm Holly Cook, joined by fellow Earth scientist Dr. Anthony Reid. How are you going, Anthony?
Very well, Holly. Good to see you again.
I'm even more pleased to see Dr. Isra Ezad opposite us today in the studio. Anthony, we had a fantastic conversation with Director of Centre and Critical Resources for the Future, Professor Marco Fiorentini, last episode. This time, we're looking at Isra Ezad, lecturer and experimental petrologist at the University of Western Australia.
Can you just tell us a little bit about your journey? How did you end up in Western Australia and igneous petrology? What have you been doing?
So you can probably tell that I am not Australian. I've made the big transplanet journey from the UK. So born and brought up in the UK. And I was really fortunate about 5 years ago to move over to Sydney, where I spent 4 years working as a postdoctoral research fellow. And that was really my first introduction to Australian geology. And I am ashamed but excited to say that I now know that Australia has volcanoes. This is something that you're not told.
No.
We're not told either. I mean, maybe some people here in South Australia where we have Mount Gambier down the bottom.
I just thought that was a blue lake. That was just a swimming. Anyway, you're not alone. We didn't.
It's not well known though. Yeah.
That's absolutely right. And, you know, Australia has this incredible record of Earth history. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to learn about it and now teach. And so less than a year ago, I then made the transition to Perth, where I'm based now. And I do my experiments there. And so, yeah, that's my journey in a nutshell.
Now, Isra, when we last sat down with the Centre and Critical Resources for the Future, we travelled through the Library of Earth History with Marco, and we explored the ancient forces that created the endowed Australian continent we know today. But we literally skimmed the surface. And with you, I would like to look at the creation stories that are much deeper in the Earth's interior, and that would be in the mantle. Before we extend ourselves into the depths of the Earth, literally we have some depths of the Earth sitting with us at the table here, I would like you to maybe explain what it means to be an experimental igneous petrologist, because what a set of words that is.
That's right. Let's break it down, Holly. So we've got the experimental component. So quite literally, I am one of those scientists that occasionally wears white coats in my lab.
Awesome.
I see.
Very nice.
Classic look. Yeah.
It is. But unlike some of the others, it's more to prevent oil from splashing on. Yeah. So we use a range of really incredible hydraulic presses to push so that we can create some of those pressures deep inside our planet. So that's the experimental component. The petrologist component, that's really about understanding minerals in our planet and really taking the time to appreciate how they form, how they transform over geological time, and really getting an understanding of those processes which happen over the lifespan of our planet. So that's, in a nutshell, what I do.
Igneous petrology. What is the mantle?
So
Let's
straight into it.
Let's just start
What is
there.
mantle?
What is the mantle?
So I can show you what the mantle is.
Ooh.
Excellent.
So we've got two beautiful, what we call mantle xenoliths.
Ooh.
And this gorgeous green component that you can see in the middle, this little square tablet, that is the mantle. And so it represents a rock that forms the vast majority of our planet. More than 60% of our planet is made of this gorgeous green rock, which is dominated by this green mineral called olivine. And really, in the simplest terms, it is the main ingredient of our planet. So when we think about all the processes that are occurring, when we think about volcanism, when we think about the creation of plates and all those amazing environments, really, this is our starting place.
Yeah.
You need this main ingredient, and then you can make all those wonderful processes occur.
Right. And it's sitting in this black thing. If this is mantle, if this is the mantle, why am I holding it right now on the Earth's surface?
Yeah, great question, Holly. So the mantle is really inaccessible. So
have we ever drilled? Have we ever dug a hole to the mantle?
Complicated question.
Ooh.
Yes and no. So some of our deep sea drilling programs where we're trying to really understand the composition of the oceanic crust, we've just hit the intersection, we think, of where we have some of this mantle component, which is amazing. But really, this is inaccessible.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really fortunate to have beautiful samples like this that are brought up to the surface of the planet. And they do that via being erupted in volcanic eruptions. And so when we have a huge magma punching through the surface, it rips up pieces of mantle along the way. They get encapsulated in this black material that's called basalt. And then sometimes if you're lucky, you can smash one of these open and you might be lucky enough to find a little bit of treasure from deep inside our planet.
It definitely looks like a treasure.
Yeah.
It really does look like a treasure.
Wild. So this green stuff is what forms the majority of our planet. It sits above the core, beneath the crust.
Yep.
It formed a very long time ago, 4 billion years, age of the Earth kind of thing.
Absolutely.
What does it do? What's it been doing for 4 billion years? Can it be created? Can it be destroyed? Does it sit there and just chill out? Or what does mantle do?
So the mantle, it forms a variety of our processes. Probably one of the most important ones is that it actually enables our planet to be an active tectonic environment. And we all know that without plate tectonics, there would be no life on our planet.
Mm-hmm.
So really, this is the beating heart of our planet.
Mm-hmm.
We need the mantle to be able to exchange. So in a way, we can destroy the mantle, but only partially. So when we create volcanic eruptions, we're melting our initial ingredient, but not all the way. Just a little bit.
So this stuff actually melts and eventually makes for volcanic eruptions. How does that sounds like a process?
That's absolutely a process. So let's take one of the most famous examples. Let's go to Iceland for a second.
Yeah.
And Iceland is a fantastic place to look at geology in action.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have the North American plate and the Eurasian plate, and they're moving away from one another. And as they do so, the oceanic crust is thinning and it thins all the way until it snaps, essentially. And at that point, we actually reduce the pressure. And in doing so, we can induce melting. And when melting occurs, that's why we have these fantastic, glorious eruptions that happen on Iceland, fire fountains, red lava appearing. And that's all because the mantle has been reduced down to a very shallow depth. And that's when we can induce melting.
Fantastic. So it sounds like then, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Isra, is does the mantle change? Like if it's this big thing that just forms a huge chunky layer in our planet, is it even possible to change that? That sounds like a process that is affecting the mantle. Is that right?
Absolutely. So we've talked about the creation of new magma at mid-ocean ridges, so Iceland. But in order, you must always maintain balance in the planet. And so where we are actually thinning the crust and we're generating new volcanoes, we're actually returning portions of our planet as well back into the deep. And we do that at subduction zones. So the Ring of Fire, we know that around the Pacific margin of our planet, we're actually returning oceanic crust back into the depths. And in doing so, we're introducing things like water and oceanic sediments.
Water into the mantle. What does that mean?
Well, that means that we can actually modify the composition. So whilst
But you mean
like
seawater, right?
Yes and no. So seawater's playing a really important role. So seawater is actually changing the composition of these minerals. So that's that petrologist component.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're looking at the sediments that are sitting on top of our oceans, our oceanic crust, they're actually being modified by the interaction of water. So I'm not just talking about pouring some water back into the mantle, but it gets locked up into those minerals and then water is transported as part of that mineral and it goes back into the mantle where it will then release liquid water in some form and modify this. And we'll no longer have a gorgeous green looking mantle. We might end up with a darker component of the mantle.
Wow. So I wonder then if you zoomed up into space and you, with the world's biggest chainsaw, cut the world in half. This is sounding this sounds awfully gory. This is not my real dream, but hypotheticals, please. We cut the world in half and we examine the mantle, which is mostly solid. First wild thing. It feels like maybe we'd see patches. Would it be a patchy mantle?
Absolutely. I think that's a really fair assumption to make. I mean, the nicest example that I know is marble cake. So when we have those
Yum.
swirling patterns, yeah, delicious. Yeah, cake analogy. Yeah.
Please, keep going. Keep going.
And so where we have that beautiful swirling of that vanilla portion and that chocolatey portion, that's probably what our mantle looks like, where we've got some regions which are completely vanilla, some portions where you've got really intimate mixing, but some portions which are totally chocolate. And that really represents this really long-term stirring and changing of these minerals over our Earth's entire history.
This is starting to feel similar to excellent, but it's starting to feel similar to what Marco was saying. That really stuck with me from that episode, which was the Earth is dissipating out like order in a sense. Like there are things happening on our planet, not least plate tectonics, that is creating patterns, creating patchy patterns. So you mentioned Iceland, how plate tectonics and mantle composition, that what goes on with those two variables?
So when we're thinking about the composition of our planet, we can actually just look at our starting block, for example.
So this is starting block.
This is our starting block. Green. And actually, this is a really nice example because not only do we have our green starting block, but we have the product of what happens when we melt the mantle.
Oh, excellent.
So this is lovely. So this gorgeous black basalt, this is actually the product of when you melt this a little bit. And so we can track that back. And we're very fortunate that occasionally, and I really mean occasionally, we can get these beautiful samples of mantle that appear. But actually our best interpretation or record of what's happening down deep is looking at the basalts. We have volcanism and basalts present on all of our continents, on all of our oceans, and they've occurred throughout geological time. So whilst we've not always had access to the deep interior, that little link, we can form that with all of these volcanic processes that are occurring and understanding their composition first.
Oh, wow. So we often talk when we have people in the studio about the exotic field sites that we get to visit, whether that be, I don't know, Iceland or remote outback Australia or the Andes. So not only does the mantle visit you occasionally in its full original form, but we can track it through its products of melting like basalts. But additionally, when you put on that white coat and you enter your lab, you can also simulate the mantle. And that is a very, very novel thing. I don't fully understand that. Why is it important for you to do those experiments about the mantle at all?
Well, so what we're actually getting when we get a bit of the mantle that comes up to the surface, or indeed when we're having a look at volcanism, it's only part of the story, part of the truth. And really, as scientists, we want to understand that full process. And so the best way for us to do that is actually to recreate those conditions in a really clean environment so that it's controlled. So whilst I'm sat here telling you that, yes, this lovely green rock does melt indeed to make this black rock.
Just trust me.
Just trust me, right? That's not good enough. We're scientists here. We need rigor.
Thank you.
And so the way that we do that is we can actually either take a little bit of this green rock, we can put it within our experiments, we can put it under huge pressures back to where we know melting occurs at depths like 30 kilometers. And we can also heat up this rock until it melts. We can then recover that melted portion and we can actually double check, does this make sense? Can we actually recreate this black basalt from melting a mantle peridotite?
I've got a vision in my mind of those hydraulic press videos that you see.
Is it,
When they squeeze it and the lollies go squeezing out. You know,
I love those ones.
Yeah.
Anyway,
do you literally?
That's almost exactly what we do.
Stop it.
Yeah, it is.
with the lollies.
Well, I wish we did it with lollies. Yeah, that would be far more fun.
You do it with rocks.
We do it with rocks.
So how do you, like, I can get the idea that you can
mantle in your hand,
squeeze
sorry.
it. I get the idea you can squeeze it and
Yeah.
compress it. But how do you heat it up at the same time?
So with those lolly videos, obviously everything's being extruded out.
Sure. Yeah.
That would be a real problem if we were just
would
extruding
be.
out
Bad for
sideways.
health and safety.
Absolutely. Wouldn't get past it. So what we actually do is the way that I explain what's going on in our experiment. So do you know Russian dolls?
Yep.
Where you have the very tiny baby doll
Mhm.
and everything stacks out. So that very first baby doll, the teeny tiny one, that is our little chip of rock.
I see.
And what we do is then we add layers to it so that it's encapsulated and safe. One of those layers is a jacket that we can heat up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it works similar to how your toaster works, conductive heating.
I set fire to my toast, but I'm luckily I'm
What?
not doing a lot of lab work.
You're banned from this lab.
Absolutely. Yeah, wouldn't let you in.
The black mark.
No, I don't wear white coats well. So we have a jacket that you can heat up.
That's right. And so you resistively heat it just like you would in your toaster. And so you can very easily control the temperature that you're going to. And depending on how hard you push with that hydraulic ram, you will then squeeze those little Russian dolls down, reduce their size. And we know how much pushing equals what depth in the planet. And that's how we can then actually heat these things up, melt bits of the granite rock, and then recover them to have a look at their composition as well.
So it's sounding like it is important to constrain our understanding of how the mantle behaves. I'm trying to figure out here, when you look at your mantle xenoliths sitting inside the products of its partial melting and you simulate these conditions in a lab with the white coat, why are we doing this at all? Because the dots I'm trying to connect is the mantle holds a bit of metal.
It does.
And the metal in Marco's komatiites doesn't just appear there with the snap of the geology fingers. It undergoes a series of processes. So what dots are you connecting and what you understand about the mantle to actually trace the metal's deep, deep earth origins to a deposit that we access to make a resource out of?
Yeah. So we know the composition of our starting ingredients really, really well. But if we want to really understand how that might go into ore forming processes, like you just said, we need to connect those threads, those dots, because there's an awful lot of time and a lot of distance between where mantle melting is occurring and where deposits are on the surface of our planet.
What kind of distances are we talking about?
Oh, we're talking distances around 100 kilometers at least, as a minimum. It could be deeper. So these are huge, huge distances that we need to cover.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do need other processes. It's not just good enough to be able to melt parts of the mantle. You actually need to then be able to distill and concentrate those metals in high enough quantities that actually it's worth someone going out and looking for those. But you don't see that in practice, right? Because what you can see is, that's right, that's what you get. So this is where you need to have a bit of your scientific creative thinking going on.
Interesting.
And you need to be able to start thinking about how you can actually imitate some of those processes that occur. So as geologists, we'll go out and we'll have a look perhaps at a resource or a deposit, and we'll be able to say, perhaps I had fluids involved, perhaps I had deep melts involved, but we can actually test that process. So we're untangling all of the ambiguity that comes with actually looking at rocks on the surface of the planet. So what we can do is we can actually melt some of these, and then we can apply another process. We can flush a fluid through there. Or we could do a reaction. We might say that we know that our melts are going to get stored in the crust. So why don't we first melt, react, flush a fluid through, react again. And we trace the same journey that these melts would have taken in order to form a deposit. And in doing so, we can actually follow the journey of several metals of interest and understand where they're going to be and in which geodynamic environment as well.
Oh my gosh, there's so much in that.
I immediately want to know, in a sort of standard piece of mantle, olivine.
You're not impressed. Standard mantle.
I am impressed. Don't worry, I'm just trying to say there's other types of mantle.
Absolutely.
But let's just say in this type
Patches.
of green patch, how much, what's the percentage of ore, of metals which we might use as ores or find as ores? How much?
From the starting point.
Just how much is in there?
Okay, so the mantle is the initial source for all the deposits on our planet. The problem we have, though, is that they are spread between the 4 major minerals that make up peridotite.
Right.
Or
Get
the
your notebook out, kids. Here we go. The 4 major minerals.
No, this is good.
We've
Olivine?
got olivine, which is this gorgeous green, bright green.
Yep.
We have orthopyroxene, which is the kind of slightly grayer looking mineral in here. And we have clinopyroxene, another very green looking mineral. And then we have spinel, which is the black one as well. So these minerals, they actually contain all of the metals that we need.
So gold.
Oh, gold, that's a tricky one.
You've gone straight for the guts.
You've caught me out here.
Yeah.
So for gold, and perhaps for a lot of our ore-forming minerals, we need sulfur. That's our key ingredient.
And why?
Because we know that sulfur is a metal-loving element.
I see.
And
so it helps concentrate them.
Absolutely. So where you've got sulfur, there's a sniff that there might be something really interesting.
Gotcha.
There could be gold. There could be platinum group elements. So
nickel.
Nickel, that's right.
Mm.
But sulfur, besides the fact that it really loves metals, it really dislikes other minerals.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's a bit of a loner.
It is. It's a mantle loner. And so
Picturing all the sulfurs hanging out together.
metal friends.
The olivines just like
Metalheads.
don't talk to them. No.
yeah. And so sulfur in our mantle actually forms another group of minerals that we call sulfides.
Mm.
And so deep within the mantle, sulfides will be holding on a lot of interesting metals, potentially gold, potentially copper. You mentioned nickel. Nickel is actually held predominantly within olivine. And olivine makes up 60% of our mantle rock, which means it's the most dominant mineral present on our entire planet.
Mm.
This green stuff.
This green stuff. But if we're talking about making a nickel deposit, it's pretty hard to melt olivine, unfortunately.
Yeah, because just to really spell that out, this mantle mineral called olivine is a really big fan of nickel. It holds a lot of nickel in there, but nickel deposits that we use as resources they don't look like mantle rocks. They don't necessarily have their lasting place of rest in the mantle. So we're trying to think about how you get the element nickel out of its favorite mineral, olivine, hundreds of kilometers deep in the crust, and through God knows what series of processes ends up as a concentrated sulfide deposit. Is that the question we're asking here?
Absolutely.
Do you have answers?
I've got a few answers.
Wonderful. Let's go.
So those minerals that we just discussed, olivine, clinopyroxene, orthoperoxene, spinel, and sulfide, of those, we know their melting temperatures. Again, thank you, experimental petrologists.
The white coats,
The white coats, they've come back and they've saved us. They've melted these minerals at the depths where we know that mantle is present. And so we know very accurately what mineral will melt, how much will melt, and therefore their elements or that nickel that these minerals are holding on to, how much will be released. Unfortunately for us, olivine is the last mineral to melt in the mantle, which makes it very, very hard to get nickel out of the mantle and up to where we're going to form a sulfide-rich deposit.
Yeah.
So that means that we need a different nickel source in the mantle.
Right.
Interesting.
And so our green mantle is unfortunately not it.
Wow. So the green stuff that forms up most of the interior is not going to get us the nickel deposit.
Unfortunately not.
And so this feels like we're coming back to the question of, is all mantle the same? So if you're telling us that we need a different source of nickel, if we ever want to see a nickel deposit on Earth's surface, then we need to be looking at maybe those patches, not the green stuff. Is this where we're going?
Absolutely, that's right. Yeah.
The patches, great. So so let's recap. How do we make those? How do you get patches?
So those patches, we need to change the composition. So we need to alter these minerals. And one of the ways we can do that is by introducing things like water.
Seawater.
There you go, seawater. That's how we do it. So when we have all of this active plate tectonics driving the recycling of things like water or carbon dioxide, we can actually then react those fluids that come down and we can change the minerals and transform them into a new set of minerals. Those minerals, we can actually give them a name and we can call those rocks hydrous pyroxenites or the dark components of the mantle.
Nice.
I love, but hydrous peroxenite has such a ring to it. The dark side.
So good, isn't it?
Wild. So if we come back, we're ping-ponging on scales here because truthfully, this is wonderful science. Like I'm just learning so much. So you're going on the learning journey with me. If we come back to tectonics, because ultimately these changes that occur to this original green mantle, if we want to make it into a dark side hydrous peroxenite, we have to do something to it. And plate tectonics is a big thing to do to the mantle. So what do we want to look for in Earth history to identify if those patches are being made?
So again, we're going to go back to those links. We know that if you melt a certain starting ingredient, we're going to end up with a certain kind of volcanic rock. So in the great case of our green mantle, we know that if we melt it, we're going to end up with this beautiful black rock, a basalt. But if we melt one of our dark hydrous pyroxenites, we're actually going to end up with a different group of volcanic rocks. And those we call our alkaline rocks. So they are very water rich, unsurprisingly. They're very rich in things like potassium and sodium. And so that's how we would identify through Earth history. Again, using the same processes, let's go look at some beautiful volcanoes. Let's look at their composition and let's connect them back down to what that means for the mantle.
Oh my goodness, I love this. Before connecting this to, again, the metalliferous resource systems and Australian resources, I want to ask you a question then, and I'm looking at both of you as as geology,
Don't ask me.
The geologist at the table. So the source of, would it be fair to say that the ultimate source of the rocks that sit on top of Earth's planet that we run around on is mantle?
Absolutely.
And so what we're saying then is that different kinds of igneous rocks that exist on this planet can either be tracked, very broadly speaking, can be tracked back to beautiful green mantle or exotic dark side hydrous peroxenite.
That's definitely true. And a whole spectrum in between.
Sure.
Yeah. There's that continuum, right?
Absolutely. So we're really just talking about those two end members. But that's not to say that they're the only two, and they're absolutely not. There is an entire spectrum going from green to slightly smudgy all the way through to dark. So yeah, think of it as a continuous process.
And the scientific journey to get to that, to get to this understanding, have we always gotten our ideas about the mantle right? And I'm both talking about like looking at the rocks, about like looking at mantle rocks, but also being in a lab. Have we had those, how have we gone thinking about the mantle in the past?
So it's always come from a place of observation. And I think that's one of the most incredible gifts that we have as geologists, is being observers on our planet, being able to pick up a rock and try and decipher what that history is. But you then have to test it in a lab. And no, we've not always got it right, because we do have these gorgeous bits of rock that come up. And sometimes we've ignored some of those unusual, exotic looking ones because we didn't understand what they meant. And it's not until we've started to connect those dots with those really water, sodium, salty rich volcanoes and gone, well, I experimentally melted my green rock and it didn't make that. Therefore, I had to have been melting something else. And so then that's when you start playing your detective work and you go, okay, well, if I slightly change the minerals present here and then melt those, well, now I can make this salty, water rich volcanic rock. And then you go back into the field and it's no surprise that you find those present as well.
Oh, the scientific method in action.
Yep.
Wonderful. So with your work, Isra, what constraints do you, when you walk into your lab, what are you trying to understand better?
So these days, I'm really interested, again, this story of water particularly and carbon dioxide and how we make these dark components of the mantle. And have we really understood their use and utility, particularly for mineral systems? Because we all know, and what we're first taught is that the mantle is green, but the mantle is dark. It's got these gorgeous different pieces to it. And we're only just beginning to connect the dots now, I think, for understanding how dark components of the mantle are actually linked to mineral systems and forming some of the deposits that we're interested in these days.
Amazing.
So if I ask one more spanner in the works question, I don't know how this is going to land. If you could talk to the most interesting part of the Australian mantle, what would it say?
Oh, well, I would say that been very hot for a very long time. And this is something that you would have talked about with Marco and the generation of Komatiites. Australia has this incredible record of really hot old mantle that's seen a lot. It's melted. It's then had all of this water and CO2 put back into it.
A lot of dark patches.
A lot of dark patches in there. And we have evidence for that as well. We have beautiful alkaline water, salty rich volcanism that occurs as well. And it would really be encapsulating all of that Earth history to say, hey, look at me. I'm a perfect snapshot of our planet, of the history that needs to be told here and those processes that have occurred.
Which means something for bringing metal to the surface for Marco's library.
Fantastic. Beautiful.
Can I ask a question? I just want to know about how you heat something in a lab to get it so hot that you can melt rock. I mean, what kind of fires and furnaces are you using?
That is such a fair question. What are you doing in there?
Absolutely. That's a very fair question. So it actually depends on the material that we're using as our jacket. And so we use graphite. Graphite is a really excellent conductor, and it means that we can actually heat it up to very, very high temperatures. And the graphite won't melt.
Right. How hot do you get to get it?
We can get to temperatures of around 1,800 degrees.
1,800 degrees.
To put this in another way, that's about your usual oven at home working 5 times extra than it would do normally.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it really is kind of furnaces and stuff in there. You're getting hot.
We are getting hot. Yeah, that's right. And it all relies on the fact that we understand the properties of graphite. And so we know that if we put it down to the right pressure, it means it's not going to melt. That's the main thing. And so we can, again, like I said, resistively heat it like our toasters, get it up to those really high temperatures when we can actually generate melts and melt little bits of rock.
Amazing. Don't try that at home, Rory.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't try that at home.
I've got an even dumber question. How do you stop the walls of this oven thing you've got from melting itself? Like, how do you not just burn the whole building down? It gets so hot.
That's a fair question. So all of these Russian dolls that I talked about, they're actually sat within a huge steel confining ring. And in that steel confining ring, we're actually circulating chilled water. So we're very conscious that we don't want to overheat the whole area. But also, to put this into context, the thing that we're heating up, it really is as small as one of those baby Russian dolls. So maybe just a centimetre. So all of this action is happening in a really, really small, very well-controlled, confined space.
This is like, I feel like Rory, our fantastic podcast producer.
He's got a bit of an imagination, though. Obviously.
No. Because you know what I'm thinking? It's like, you know, when we're worried about physicists making mini black holes in a lab, Isra's lab is just...
Rory's picturing the whole melting a hole in Perth somewhere.
That is awesome. Awesome questions, Rory. Isra, what an absolute treat to talk about this kind of science with you. Thank you for coming into the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.